Bonjour à tous.
Good afternoon, everyone. As it's been said, the presentation will be about the telling of the work carried out between June 2018 and October 2020 with a group of experts and professionals to try and draw the possible outlooks for the palm sector by 2040-2045. So what I would like to tell you about is some methodology on how we did it to define future scenarios. And also, to make sure that there's no misunderstanding, it's important to make the difference between forecast and outlook. Forecast is like weather forecast, when you use the present data and that you have enough data to understand what happened from the past to the present. And thanks to that, we can define what is more likely to happen given the factors that we are aware about. So it is the weather forecast as a typical example, which we use a lot in agriculture, so that we know how, the weather is likely to evolve in the near future, and the further you go in the future, the least reliable it is. But the future is not predictable. This is why we're using the outlook notion. So we're using the same set of data on the past and how we arrived to the present, but we use low signals to expand what we call the cone, or the range of possible futures. So we can define several scenarios. An example we usually use to illustrate this is Jules Verne. Jules Verne goes to the circus. He sees the cannon man propelled through the roof of the tent, and it makes him imagine that someday we'll be able to go through the moon. And as an engineer, he tries to define an accurate scenario on how we're going to do that. So outlook into the future is usually collective, to try and design scenarios of the future. Because we can't have an impact on the past, our willpower can only impact the future. This is where we can have control and power on what's going to happen. This is where we have leeway. But it is only possible through collective thinking and actions. A few typical sentences of our group. No anticipation means no freedom of action. When it's urgent, it's already too late. If you're 1 week late in mail, most of them are already not valid anymore. Deciding nothing is making a decision, but it's not always the best. Using power implies having a project, and there is more and more uncertainty, yes, with technical evolutions, globalization, cross-dependency, butterfly effects. We know that there is more and more uncertainty, and makes outlook interesting. And the future does not come from scratch, but from the present, which already holds heavy trends and weak signals. So we're not going to imagine to have agricultural developments on Mars in the next decades. So a few people are thinking about it, but it's not going to happen in the near future. So we need to look at what we already have in our labs, on our farms, because we're talking about agriculture outlook. All the seeds for innovation that enable us to define various options for the future. So the point is to try and be less in reaction, less reacting, and more proacting. So I'm acting on my current environment so that it turns into something more and more favorable. And then collectively, I can make sure that given the margin we have, we can have the most favorable future possible. So proper anticipation is not the one that happens as planned, but the one that leads to action. So when designing outlooks, the point is not to have the scenario happening exactly the way it was written. The point is that stakeholders can start acting, can start shifting things to promote such or such scenario. This is the result of an outlook design. That was the overview of the method. Now, more tangibly, what have we done with our Outlook group? We used the CISPAM method developed by Professor Sebillotte in agronomy. We created an expert group of the PAM. I don't know why you can't see a map on my slide, but it's map. So our experts accepted to really give a lot of their times, and I think they won't disagree with what I'm saying, given how important their time investment was. They spent a lot of time in that group. I won't give you the list, but you can see a lot of organizations that have worked through their experts. So 17 meetings took place between June 2018 and October 2020. I think here in this audience, maybe we have Bernadette Julier, Agnès is here because she's presenting later on. Gilles, I think, came to say hello. Pierre-Yves, I saw him earlier, Pierre-Yves Matonnet. Claude Chélan, Philippe Gallois, Philippe Sogel. Of course, I'm forgetting people, please don't mind me. But all these people have worked in our group. So for FranceAgriMer, it is very important to include professionals from the sector, not only among ourselves, among external experts, because it gives us an extra chance for our works to be disseminated afterwards. So this group has designed a representation of the map sector. So material flow, stakeholders, mapping. So we have published a full report. You just have to ask for it at FranceAgriMer. It's for free. And it made it possible to agree on what is the map sector and what are its borders, and how can medicinal, aromatic, and perfume plants can be one and whole sector. It's not an obvious answer compared with other agricultural sectors. It's not an easy answer. Then the group identified the most crucial issues for the future, set by specialists, either from the group or experts that we asked to intervene from the outside. Because we didn't have all the skill sets around our table. And then there were hypotheses written down on these various issues. It's a key aspect of our method. We have an expert setting, giving us a presentation. We ask questions on what they meant. And then everyone can write their own hypothesis on what this issue is going to turn into in the future. So imagining the future is not in the hands of the expert alone, but each member of the group that have understood, thanks to a presentation, what was at stake. And then we selected some of these hypotheses. A few examples so that you have an idea of what we're talking about. We wrote down many of them. I don't remember. It's one too many, as my granddaughter would say. We selected 87 on a series of topics: environment and climate change. We have an example here. Climate change and the disappearance of biodiversity have a negative impact on map production, yield reducing, and so on, versus the climate change is an opportunity for development, new productions of map in France, and so on. So this is a hypothesis. I don't know what in 20, 25 years is going to happen. Is it the positive or the negative of the imagined pictures? So we have no certainty. Maybe both can happen. There can be a bit of both, depending on the region, depending on many other factors. So this is what we call a hypothesis. Regarding consumption, consumers agree to pay more for more virtuous products versus consumers do not agree to pay more for more virtuous products. So in terms of purchasing power, it's a key question. In France, the cannabis sector is developing in a sustainable manner, whereas versus in France, the cannabis sector or branch does not develop sustainably. Worldwide consumption of MAP booms versus it declines. In terms of sector organization, a cross-professional reflection leads to management of wild resources, the practices and statuses of collectors, the products of collection, quality, price, specifications, versus no reflection is led at the cross-professional level. In terms of means of production, organic agriculture for MAP becomes very modern and mechanized to face all the challenges, versus organic agriculture for MAPs is based on observation, human intervention, non-aggressive intervention using traditional techniques. Let me go on. Regarding territories, maintaining production of maps implies that producers make a good living, whereas sustainability of map production is not related to producers' gains. That is to say, other means of income are found for producers other than selling their maps. Veterinary regulations does not facilitate the development of the use of plant-active substances, versus the change in regulation promotes the use of plant-active molecules for animal breeding. And last, changes in technology make it possible to produce all molecules from plants in the lab at competitive costs, versus the extraction processes from biomass remain economically more interesting. So this is an overview or a sample of some of the topics that after the presentations we heard, the members of the group actually wrote down these hypotheses. These hypotheses, we're going to question the relation between each theory. We created a beautiful matrix for each hypothesis, each of the 87. We are going to ask 86 questions. If these hypothesis happens, will it have an impact on the 86 other hypotheses? And some members of the groups had preconceived ideas, and still they had to find a consensus with all the others to really set answers in this table. And then we processed the matrix, and thanks to that, we forced ourselves to write down stories. And so we came up with tales, scenarios that were plausible, relevant, neither delirious nor over-consensual, and therefore neither true, neither false, neither probable nor improbable, likely, unlikely, but possible. What do we find in each scenario? This is what we call the canvas, the basis of the scenarios. All the elements that were implemented in each of our 5 scenarios. So health, safety, climate change, societal expectations, economic globalizations, cost of fuel, synthetic versus natural active substances, international exchanges, cost of transportation, territorial and agricultural policies, production methods, consultation between stakeholders in the sector, training, human resources, research, global genetic resources. We've already learned a lot. Regulations, thresholds of contamination, variability of the NCSs, labeling, multistasis of the plant, production systems, collection, competitiveness, and in terms of demand, the changes in global demand, pharmaceutical industry, French consumption, French production, the changes in the evolution of prices in palm, and price competitiveness versus differentiation. All these elements were included in each of our 5 scenarios. So we came up with 5 scenarios. So I hope I will frustrate you, and so therefore you will dive into the brochure that was in your in the files that you have received or will receive to read the entire scenario. So A, the map sector declines faced with synthetic products. So a market which is limited for natural products. The oil becomes too expensive, so extraction or import of plants are economically interesting. Second, the map sector finds a realistic and efficient response to the need for naturality. This looks a bit more positive than the previous one, but here you have an industry that develops a comprehensive map range of products and a sector that is organized to meet with the demand. Third scenario, without collective governance, the map sector leaves the leadership to the industry, and the market is reduced because of climate change that is not favorable to MAP, and regulation and environmental limitations are more and more heavy. So the production under labels and compliant to the regulation is more and more difficult to achieve. Then, next scenario, the map sector meets with local and global demands, so more productivism and post-globalization models. So you have more local production and more productivism. And then regulation does not facilitate production and imposes limits to the development. And fifth story, MAP become nearly useless. We're in a technological and trade world, so the technology has taken over the need for natural products. Solutions were found like messenger RNA for vaccines. All technological solutions in terms of health have been met with technologies. So the need for natural products becomes secondary, and MAP do not find outlets anymore except for landscape management and some ecosystemic advantages. Of course, it's a very quick overview. What can we do with all this? I told you it's neither true nor false, neither probable nor improbable. The question is it interesting? What's at stake and what could be the consequence of each of these scenarios? And how do we work with that? What strategy do we adopt from it? So, what came out of the discussions? I'm sorry, my slide is full of holes. The calorific non-food aspect of MAP imposes to create consumption opportunities to meet with the need for natural green products, but with highly processed products, with long distribution processes, but that leads to a risk for the natural image of the products. So how can we make it compatible between societal expectations for natural products and highly elaborated and processed products?
Well, what about societal expectations? People kind of reject technology. That's the question we have to ask. Are people ready to accept the alliance of technology and the natural world? And in terms of regulation, they are varied. There are many. AB labeling in non-food groups, allegations versus scientific proof for health usage, access to health markets for animals and for plants, REACH, Nagoya, all of these challenges, food challenges, all of these have been very present right through our conversations and our presentations, and I imagine for you in daily life. So, what levers must we use in order to go in the right direction with regards to regulation? That's one of the questions we have in terms of governance and organization for the sector. There are indeed needs which are fairly specific, and we find them in no other branch. For example, eco-extraction, certification protocols for the effects, understanding of the cost of manpower in adapting, in sourcing, adapting to climate change by any kind of different crops, diversification. Now, all of these are cross-cutting, the cross-cutting subjects which were highlighted as being fundamentally important. Now, once we've discovered what is interesting in these scenarios, if you want to continue to advance towards strategy, well, then you have to choose. You have to choose the scenario that suits. What can we do? And we have to stop strategies and say, this is what we're going to do. In order to make a choice, the following is a suggestion. You have to determine a strategic attitude for each one of the scenarios then. Do we want to act as of today for these scenarios? Or are we ready to act today so that one of these scenarios doesn't come true? Do we think we've not got a lot of room for maneuver, but we better prepare ourselves anyway, either because it's a good thing and we should try and take advantage of it, as Seneca said, there are no favorable winds for those who do not know how to take to the sea? Or do we try and react like a judo student in order to prepare ourselves for the shock, not to hurt yourself and be able to send the energy elsewhere? Or do we have to look for different attitudes, monitoring, being a watchdog, saying, well, this seems to be fairly far away, but, I should be alert to this and I should make sure people are aware of what's happening, or say, I don't understand this story and it's no appeal to me. So these are all possibilities. We want to talk about this, and this is what we wanted to talk about during a forum in April 21. Now, when we looked at this Outlook exercise, when COVID came to play, we had one meeting left to do in our group. It was a meeting that was supposed to take place in May 2020. So we were as surprised as everyone else by the pandemic. We held our reunion all the same virtually, and we asked everybody in the group to tell us, given what's happening, do you think we should just get rid of everything, ditch everything in the project? And the reply was no. In the hypotheses, the one that talks about energy crisis and climate change and economic crisis, we have that. And in there, we can encompass the sanitary crisis, so we can keep our scenarios. We did not change the criteria for the various scenarios, which had already been finished at that stage. We didn't change anything because of COVID. We wanted to have a feedback session with everybody present around the table, as we're used to doing. When you finish an Outlook planning session, we normally do that, but we couldn't do that in 2020 or 21. We wanted to do it perhaps in the wings of an ITIP conference that we could have done that, but we weren't able to. So we ended up working virtually. We did what we could with the means at hand. And so we had the public involved. We had about 40 experts from the sector involved, and we gave them all of the scenarios. Now, what we heard in terms of strategic attitude, scenario B, was welcomed enthusiastically. Proactive, you have to act. I am ready to act to follow this. Scenario D, it's a little mixed with regards anticipated reaction, and the three other scenarios being scenarios which were actually kind of repellent, pushing back the boundaries. So the error would be then to say, well, we're going to take B and that's the only one we're going to deal with. We're not going to mention anything else. We'll just have action plans put in place for scenario B. That would be wrong because the other perspectives they remain fairly threatening in a future which is possible. So we mustn't try and counterset these other scenarios. We can't be sure that they won't actually happen. So the idea is to plan for the possible, to work them all together, work on all of the scenarios in order to implement actions and an action plan. This hasn't been done as of yet for maps. So in terms of conclusion, what are we going to do? What are we going to do with all of this material that's been accumulated? Well, the idea would be create a discussion network, exchange between producers, processors, industrialists, researchers, in order to build on this basis, as if it were putty, to build, to construct, to move forward in order to ensure that when we're talking about the future, we can have very real discussions now which are not going to be affected by immediate challenges, where we're talking about centimes or molecules or whatever, to really deal with what's possible in the future, to see if in this image that we have of the future, all of the professional families are at the table or not. If a family has disappeared, if a plant has disappeared, well, what's happened to lead us to this, and what can we then do to ensure that this reality does not become one? To try and project yourself forward in this material, to discuss the scenarios in order to ensure that actions come to light which represent all the different strategic attitudes. Now, the actions to encourage the most desirable action is the one which could be destined to avoid any kind of repellent scenarios. That's the question. And for the scenarios which solicit early reactivity, then how? How do we prepare for that? So this is the work that has occupied our experts for over 2 years. Or was the sentence I wanted to say is missing, but you can see the picture. The picture of somebody who is digging through the clouds, and the sentence that we associate with that we've taken from a former MEC is, you have to dig through the clouds if you want the sun to come out again one day. That's a former mayor of Quebec, Mr. Lallier, that said that. So that means you can't, nothing is too extreme. We must look at all the matter that we have to debate, and we have to be sure to try and solicit reactions, stimulate reactions, make sure that we take the time to take hold of all this information and work with it. Thank you very much for your attention. And in the room, I know there are some people who participated in this exercise. I think we could have some reactions from them. I'm just taking over as moderator, if you don't mind. Thank you very much. We're going to hand over to the room now to see if there are any comments or questions. Please hold up your hand if you want to speak. If not, I'm going to dig you out. I know where you are. Philippe, come on, say something. I can't see anyone else. I know I can see Philippe. There are two Philippes. Thank you. Thank you, Françoise, for this feedback. And I have a comment and a question. I was lucky enough to participate in this exercise. There are two things that I want to talk about. First of all, something original happened here. And before we finished, and of course that was the COVID crisis, we decided to continue the exercise for the reasons that you explained. And we saw what's happening in the world today in terms of geopolitics and all the consequences that that might have. We've talked a great deal, or we did talk during the sessions that we had together about the impact of the cost of energy. And here, we've been talking about that for 2 days, the impact of the price of energy could have on the sector. I would like to have your opinion as a specialist in outlook forecasting. How can a historic episode then, like the one we're living through today, how could this have an influence on the size of the potential that's going to come out of this period? Is there going to be a reference made in history to the people who are participating in this crisis? Is there going to be an impact of all this felt in terms of the methodological research that will remain? Well, I think what's difficult is to avoid being too influenced by things that are happening in the here and now. If we start looking at outlooks and perspectives in the middle of a sanitary crisis, we're going to see the crisis everywhere, or an energy crisis that's the same thing, and it's going to be very difficult to widen the scope and go beyond that. And that's why the reaction that you've all had by saying we have certain elements which allow us to see that the economic crisis also includes the health crisis, and that's what's going to be sought after. It's not to be stuck in the here and now of what's happening now. In future possible scenarios, in particular where energy problems are raised, we have defined certain consequences, the cost of freight, the cost of molecule extraction, etc. And we've linked that with other ideas. No, so that today we can look back into the scenarios using this as a background. So that's happened. We are living through an energy crisis. But we also have to be able to talk about scenarios where we're not an energy crisis in 20 years. Perhaps we will have come out of this energy crisis. We can consider that as an option. The risk, I think, is to be too embedded under the weight of today and what is happening in the here and now. Now, Françoise, first of all, I'm delighted to see you again, and thank you for this presentation. It was very synthetic. I think perspectives or outlook forecasting is not easy to comprehend. I don't have much to add. The only regret I have is that, well, although I had it took a great deal of pleasure in working with the people who participated in this study for various reasons which usually were external to the project itself. We were not able to work right into the end together in terms of exchange and feedback. So the regret I have today, and it's a regret I have today, but it's not finished, is we didn't really conclude this work together. We didn't really take it all on board in order to try and to shed some light on what we would like to imagine for the future. I think that this was a wonderfully interesting project, but unfortunately, it came to its conclusion at a very inappropriate moment. But thank you. Well, the advantage of this project is there is no real deadline to it. We are looking at 2040 as our deadline. We're not there yet. It's still possible, of course, to take all of this on board and to work on it in an effective fashion. We've still got time to find the right format. Is it national? Is it per sector, per profession? Is it per region, per regional sector? Everything remains possible. And of course, the advantage of FranceAgriMer is the following. As much as we can be available to help moderate work and work on this subject with people. Well, that was basically what I was trying to say. It was a small call to attention to say that with FranceAgriMer, or the Institute, it would be good that we continue to work together, that we do something with this study. Thank you, Philippe. To continue, I wanted to ask a question. With the hindsight that you have now, working with other sectors, even if we know that outlook is based over a long period, how did other sectors react to this work? Which organ, which body in these sectors would actually take this kind of study on board to see, which scenario we're going to look at? Who's going to pick up the baton and carry on? Well, each sector has its own organization. In some, they have outlooks where they question the certainties and the directions that they've taken, so we have to give them time to digest the information. There are also sectors where they thought it was perhaps judicious to wait, and when we have others where they've picked up on elements in their plans, in their work, which were ongoing in strategic terms already in their branch, in small areas, perhaps not taking on board all of the scenarios. We also have sectors which were interested by the representation. I'm thinking of horticulture. When we put in the one plan production and all the departments or services given by horticulture, this gave the branch a tool to allow them to think about the sense of urgency and gravity in the interprofessional world. Now, we're not in all of the discussions, obviously, but at this juncture, we're working closely with the 20 IGPs for whom we've already worked in 2020. And there we've had regional feedback sessions, we've grouped people together, we've had proposals, action proposals, and now we're working with directors from different bodies in order to try and delineate an action plan. So there has to be the will of the structure. Maybe they want something smaller or less complicated, although I don't know. Every and each branch takes on board what the results that they want for their particular service. Thank you. I think we can give Françoise another round of applause.